Well, a good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to round 8 of the Alpha. I'll try that again. Always mess up on the stars, but it's great to be back here for round 8 of the AROC Racing Leads Touring Car Championship, the first half of the Touring Car Championship for 2025. We are here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit for this evening's racing, a track we haven't visited for a little while, actually, so it's great to be back. We visited it in the Formula Alphas, rather, but we haven't visited it for a while in the Giulietta WTCRs. It has been a while since we've seen these cars out on this circuit, so it's great to be back here with just over 6 minutes left to go in qualifying at this point. Perhaps unsurprisingly, qualifying being led by Mr. David Jelly here. Of course, great successes over the past couple of AROC Racing League seasons, and he seems to be once again just showing his truly impressive one lap pace is David, being followed though very closely indeed, or rather by about 2 seconds is the margin, by Andrew Whitehead. Andrew Whitehead also showing immense pace in the touring cars. You'd almost forget that he took a break out for a couple of seasons in both the Formula Alpha and the touring car, as he is currently running in P2. Then we have Greg Young running in P3. Greg's missed a couple of rounds, so great to see Greg back on track here for the Jeddah Corniche circuit. It is perhaps not the most traditionally well regarded in terms of overtaking, but at least it provides some great action because the walls are so tight, so close. It's fairly fast for a street circuit, and it certainly provides a bit of a challenge for the drivers. Nathan Birch also in the same team, the 939 Corsa team there. Running in P4 is Nathan Birch, followed by Alan Matthews, Steve Knight, Paul Millman, Matt Daly, Jack Hodson, Andrew Brammer, and Guy Swarbrick are 11 car fields so far, at least, for this evening's racing. And it is great to see Guy here in this session, I might add, because Guy is running a virtual reality headset, of which the battery actually ran out during practice or before the start of practice. So Guy has had little practice here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. Likewise for Andrew Whitehead, I believe, as well. So it's impressive stuff from Andrew Whitehead to be running in P2 at the moment as he pushes on. He's not had a single chance to get some practice into this circuit. So we're treating practice and qualifying like a bit of a practice run. Just over 4 minutes on the clock. And this qualifying session is still led by a fairly comfortable margin. But if you look at the likes of P2, P3, and P4, it's a good few tenths separating the drivers, and it is only a few tenths as well. We've got a few drivers likes of Andrew Whitehead, Matt Daly, and Greg Young running in a 2-minute 12-second time there as Matt Daly pushes on quite nicely and improves. He hadn't set a really competitive lap time up until late and is now running, well, was briefly running in P2, but is now dropping down to P4. That's because Greg Young has improved to get a little bit closer to Andrew Whitehead. Now he dives into the pit, but there's a nice progression there from Greg Young. Bit of an on-track battle there between Guy Swarbrick and Paul Millman by the looks of things, as we see Guy Swarbrick abandoning his attempt and diving in to the infield, back into the pits as well. Bit more battling as well, as we see 0 seconds on the clock. The checkered flag drops. There we go. David Shelley comes across the line there, but only just in front of Jack Hodson as well. Jack Hodson still pushing on. David Shelley, Andrew Whitehead, still pushing on is Andrew Whitehead. Greg Young comes across the line ahead of Nathan Birch as well. We've got Paul Millman, Steve Knight, and Guy Swarbrick all coming across the line there. Andrew Whitehead is still out on track, so we're going to jump on board with Andrew, but it's David Shelley with provisional pole, who is looking fairly comfortable out in front, it must be said, unless Andrew can do anything on this attempt. So far through Sector 1, he's losing time, is Andrew Whitehead. Bit of a bump with the wall for Andrew Brammer there, but he continues on. You're going to see plenty of that in this evening's racing, I suspect, as those small scrapes with the wall are just part of the course, really, with this circuit. As we see Andrew Brammer bringing the car home. David Shelley still with a 2-minute 10. In fact, he improves on that final lap, I should. And David Shelley goes to 2-minute 10.1. That is a blistering time from our pole sitter here, as Andrew Whitehead abandons the lap. It's only Matt Daly out on track at the moment. Now, Andrew is improving through Sector 1. We head now down towards the back end of the Circuit 1. The prime overtaking opportunities opening up here in just a moment. The sweeping left-hander, which turns into a bit of a hairpin pretty much. You stomp on the brakes to get the car around before you head back onto the start-finish straight. Turn 25 and 26, the final part of the lap. That is just how many corners we have here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit before you jump back onto the throttle for one last push towards the checkered flag. And it's Matt Daly with a loss through the second sector. Can he make it up through the end here? I'm not quite sure if he'll be able to. He comes across the line, and it is a 2-minute 13. That is all Matt Daly can achieve here in qualifying, which means it's going to be David Shelley on pole with Andrew Whitehead joining him on the front row of the grid. But we'll join you in a few minutes as we get ready for race 1 here at Jeddah. And we are just about ready for lights out here. Going to be a quick start to this race. But here it is, David Shelley and Andrew Whitehead on the front row of the grid. 6 red lights on the gantry. And we are away for race 1 here at Jeddah. First run into the left-handed first corner. Oscar Piastri versus Max Verstappen. Are we going to see a repeat of that? No, we're going to see David Shelley controlling this race nicely as we head through turn 2 and turn 3. A bit of contact between Andrew Brammer and Nathan Birch, but pretty much only paint trading going on. Further down the order, we see Matt Daly gets ahead of Greg Young. They are side by side at the moment, as we see everyone else looking like they're getting through relatively cleanly. So nice start for our 11 cars here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. It's a pretty compact, pretty tight circuit as we now run down into Sector 2 in just a moment. A good start, though, for David Shelley, who already built a 1.3-second lead in this race using those curbs. To be honest, I was looking at this track layout earlier. I wasn't expecting the drivers to be making use of those curbs. You think in a touring car, you're not really carrying the speed into the bend, and there's also the added risk of taking the curbs, but these drivers know how to push these cars to the max much more than I do, and deciding that, you know what, we can take these curbs, we're going to get an advantage from it. Andrew Whitehead, though, clearly needs a bit more of an advantage at the moment, because here is Matt Daly on the scene and trying to push on and find a way past. Just behind him, it is going to be Greg Young as well. Greg Young is also under pressure from his teammate here. We're going to see a teammate rivalry as we head into the latter half of the lap. But still, what a great race this is shaping up to be already. Plenty of action going on throughout the field as we go back on board with Andrew Whitehead, who is now pretty much side by side with Matt Daly as we head back towards the latter third of the lap. Now, there's so many corners here, it's quite difficult to remember the numbers, if I'm honest. It's better to just say roundabouts where you are on the circuit. Of course, a modern street circuit as well. No corner names to speak of here, as we see Nathan Birch actually starting to lose his grasp on Greg Young. Now, Greg Young pushing up towards Matt Daly and Andrew Whitehead. These two battling has helped out Greg Young immensely here. And we're going to see, I think, as we head in to the final corner, Alan Matthews is now on the scene as well. This is a great battle forming up between this fleet of drivers as we head on to the start-finish straight. Andrew Whitehead feeling the pressure from Matt Daly. Matt Daly getting a nose out in front and is going to be pushing on to try and get the move done on the outside if it's all possible. It's not a traditional, but it can be done. Will it be done by Matt Daly? I think it will. Matt Daly there doing what Max Verstappen was not able to do and heads up into second position there. But in all of this battling, there we can see David Shelley in the distance by around 4.5 seconds. Here we see David Shelley still building up that gap. Matt Daly then winning out in the end, running in P2 at the moment. 5 seconds is the gap between David Shelley and Matt Daly. I think this is going to be the big story from this race. We've had our first few minutes of action, but things could settle down for a brief moment while Matt Daly begins to mount his charge to David Shelley. David Shelley, though, as we know, has immense early stint pace. Maybe the race pace isn't quite there yet, but he's a young driver. He's gaining that experience. We'll see what he can do later on into the race, but he's got immense speed, as I say. Purple Sector 1, Purple Sector 2 is currently building that gap to Matt Daly. We're looking further down the order, though, now, between Steve Knight and Guy Swarbrick. Interesting little battle going on here as we have our first true racing lap of the session. Steve Knight, we've seen in the Formula Alpha series recently, has been getting some really nice results in there, gaining some confidence, gaining some experience. He impressed me at Suzuka. Can he carry on that confidence into our touring car action? Well, we look further back down the grid and we see it side by side now between Guy Swarbrick and Steve Knight. Looks like Guy just gets the better run on to the start-finish straight as we get a nose out in front, we get the car out in front, and there we go. It's going to be Steve Knight mounting a charge against Guy Swarbrick down into turn 1. Are we going to see Steve Knight trying to push on? I thought we were for a second. He thinks better of it, though, does Steve Knight, and Guy Swarbrick continues on. Now, we have yet to talk about it so far this evening, but let's delve into some tyre compound discussion. We have got a fleet of drivers on the soft compound of tyre, apart from Paul Millman and Steve Knight. So what does that mean? Well, regular viewers will already know this, but those soft compound tyres are going to heat up quickly at the start. They're going to provide immense grip. They're going to be your qualifying tyre of choice, really. And at the start of this race stint are going to give you the most grip to push on and gain position. So those drivers who are lower down the order might opt for that tyre in order to get track position, especially at a circuit here like the Jeddah Corniche track. However, the medium tyre, as we see, big contact between Nathan Birch and Alan Matthews. That spits Nathan Birch off the circuit. No gravel traps here at the street course, so he's able to get back underway. But that is not what Nathan Birch needs in this race. He's got that pace to be up there with the front runners. We know that for a fact. But unfortunately, through these unfortunate incidents, he sees himself tumbling down the order. Now, I am aware that the audio is not currently pushing through the engine sounds. I'm trying to get that resolved. You've seen that a few times over the past few seasons worth of AROC Racing League's action. That is a bit of an OBS bug that I'm trying to resolve. I will dip out the session here every now and again to try and get that sorted. But Nathan Birch gets back underway, running in P8 at the moment. Bit of pressure from Paul Millman potentially, and Paul Millman is one of those aforementioned drivers on the medium tyre. Now, that medium tyre is going to be harder to warm up, not offer quite as much grip when the car is heavier with the heavier tank of fuel on board, and the car just has less mechanical grip as well. But later into the stint, the driver should have more grip on offer with those tyres. Nathan Birch not enjoying things out on track at the moment. What the medium tyre also offers the drivers is the chance to push on for longer. They can afford to basically forget about the condition of the tyres and just set qualifying laps throughout the entire evening's worth of racing. So we'll see how the likes of Paul Millman and Steve Knight progress in terms of their pace in this race. Although if the Formula One calendar was anything to go off, the degradation of this circuit seems to be shockingly low. I was expecting it to be a little bit higher here because you've got some fairly decent high-speed corners and, well, the surface is fairly new, but there's also some fairly decent tyre temperatures here as well. Sorry, surface temperatures, rather. 35 degree is the tarmac temperature here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. So that means that the tyre is going to be exercised fairly hard. We've got lower speeds here in the touring cars, of course, but I did expect those softs to maybe not make it to the end of the race. We'll see, though, as we progress into race 2, the reverse grid race, if we have any changes for the order. And we certainly don't have any changes for the order at the front because we are a few laps into this race now, and David Chelly is leading by 6.5 seconds. He has built up that gap as we see Steve Knight catching up to Guy Swarbrick. But David Chelly leads this race now with 6.5 seconds and is setting purple sector after purple sector as he pushes on. Here we go, Steve Knight versus Guy Swarbrick, and little change so far in this battle. And at the front end of the field, there is little change in terms of the immense pace that David Chelly is demonstrating. I am completely in awe, I must admit. I've never seen a driver perhaps the early days where Matt Daly and Colin Keith were just pushing on and battling each other, but David Shelley just seems to be able to bang in those just mega laps, really. It's mighty impressive stuff as the camera takes us back to Steve Knight versus Guy Swarbrick. Guy on the softs, Steve on the mediums. A few tenths separate them now as we head down towards the start of Sector 2, at least. Long sweeping left-hander. This is a left-hander which often caught me out, really. It was a bit of a tricky one. It doesn't unwind as much as you expect. I don't know if it reminds me of other circuits, but I expect the circuit to kind of unwind a bit, and then it just sort of doesn't, and then there's a wall in your way. It's a really tricky circuit to drive around, is the Jeddah Corniche. As I say, it has its criticisms, but it is certainly a great track to qualify around if you're a driver, and it does provide some great action. I mean, we just have to think back to 2021. Max Verstappen, obviously that lap did not go to plan, but apart from that final corner, that is a lap for the ages. I mean, for me, of my generation, that gets close to Senna at Monaco, really. Obviously, we don't have the advantage of 24 FPS cameras and the older cars, which just naturally look less settled on the circuit. So for Max Verstappen's car to just look so on edge at that point, it was bewildering stuff. Now, David Shelley pushing on still builds up that gap to around about 10 seconds, and perhaps this is the reason why Matt Daly cannot rest easy. Here is Andrew Whitehead building a response to Matt Daly, getting back past into second position. Matt Daly loses and drops down to third. Now, Matt hasn't posted any purple sectors for a little while, and Andrew's on a bit of a charge at the moment in 2-minute 10s on the last lap. But perhaps we're going to see a bit of red mist here from Matt Daly. The car in the yellow livery now pushing on as we head down towards the second sector for these two drivers. Over the curbs once again. Perhaps I shouldn't be so shocked because the corner is pretty shallow in a way. It wants you to straight line it, and of course, if you straight line it, you have to go onto the curb. Now we're seeing Guy Swarbrick having a couple of issues out on track. This could be as we approach the halfway mark in this race. The soft tyre just not quite responding in the way that he would want it to. Now the tyre is going to be fairly warm at this point and is going to start to drop off in terms of grip. And just look at the smoke billowing out of Matt Daly's rear axle. It was the front axle at first as he stomps on the brakes to try and get the car to derate behind Andrew Whitehead. The wheels locking up there as they go side by side. We run down now. Effectively, the next corner is the right-hander before turn 25. Andrew Whitehead gets a nose out back in front here. Let's see if we can get a grasp of this. Takes the outside line. That gives him the advantage to get the inside through the small right-handed kink. Now we box round to the left-handed hairpin at the end of the circuit, and we can see Matt Daly occupying every single mirror he can find on Andrew Whitehead's car. He's weaving around to try to say to Andrew, hello, Andrew, I am right here. In fact, I've got the nose out in front. It's going to be from the outside, if at all possible. I've seen this once here in my commentary career at the Jeddah Corniche circuit as we jump back on to the start-finish straight now. It's going to be Andrew Whitehead who has the lead. But the question is for how long? Because Matt Daly's car, he either got a very good run out of that final corner or he's just absolutely nailed the exit because we're going to be side by side. In fact, Matt gets a nose out in front and also has the inside line here. Can he pull an Oscar Piastri? I think he can. And there we go. It's Matt Daly into second position on this track. The question is for how long? And if we look a little bit further back, we're going to see some more battling here, or at least we did for a brief moment, but I think that might have been for a lap down. Nathan Birch in the pits here. The race not going his way. Of course, he had those earlier issues. Hopefully we see him out on track for the reverse grid action. Matt Daly then is currently the driver in P2, the driver under the most pressure, apart from Andrew Brammer. Andrew Brammer, a bit of pressure here from Jack Hodson as we head through the first sector of the lap. The left-hander followed by the right-hander. We were here at Suzuka just a fortnight ago in the touring cars, a week ago in the Formula Alpha as well, but we get a similar sort of Sector 1 here at the Jeddah Corniche, just in terms of how much the circuit backs onto itself through those S's, trying to offer you opportunities if at all possible. And now we see Andrew Brammer has the measure of Jack Hodson at the moment. But we jump back to Matt Daly. Matt Daly now separated by around about half a second from Andrew Whitehead, as Andrew Whitehead is pushing on with all of his might by the looks of things. In terms of pace at the moment, we're 10 minutes left in this race. The fuel tanks will be getting lighter but the tyres will have taken a bit of a beating now. We might see in about 2 minutes' time a phase of the race where the fuel tank gets light enough to where we start to see some really strong laps before those tyres start to drop off once more. Lock up there for Matt Daly. He tapes back P2. The question is for how long, because Andrew Whitehead is really going to push on now to try and take that position back. And there we go. Great run there for Andrew Whitehead onto the final corner and onto the start-finish straight. Is he going to try the move around the outside? No, Matt Daly has the control here as we jump back onto the brakes. Actually quite a wide part of the circuit for these touring cars. Much lower speeds than the Formula One, of course. Much smaller machinery as well. Now we see them darting through each other pretty much to try and find a way past. Both run a little bit wide through to the infield of the circuit, although it is still all tarmac here at Jeddah. And they continue on. Matt Daly in the lead ahead of Andrew Whitehead. I suspect, though, Andrew is going to have a bit of a charge here because looking stronger through the final sector is Andrew, pushing on with the purple, actually, through that last sector. 27.4. Mighty stuff from Andrew as he closes up that gap to Matt Daly. Will we see that later on into the lap once more? Alan Matthews, meanwhile, running in P5, just under 10 minutes to go in this race. We jump back on board, though, with Andrew Brammer and Jack Hodson. Just a few tenths separating them as we head on through to the bottom end of the circuit. And by the bottom end, I mean the entry into Sector 2. These two are having a battle very similar, actually, to Matt Daly and Andrew Whitehead. It's going to be Jack Hodson on the outside, Andrew Brammer defending the inside. This all comes down to the run out of the corners here at Jeddah when you've not got comparatively much power to contend with. Nothing like Formula One, of course, although these are pretty torquey, 350 horsepower, 2-litre units in these WTCR. In fact, I believe it might be 1.8 instead, so correct me if I am wrong there in the YouTube comments. Either way, 8 minutes to go in this race, and we can see Jack Cotton having a look down the inside, has to dart back behind Andrew Brammer to try and benefit from a bit of a slipstream potentially, or better yet, to set him up for the next corner entry, the next heavy braking zone. In all this action, by the way, David Chelly, 7 laps in, 15-second lead of this race. Mighty stuff from David Chelly, but there's been a big incident just as we move away from our mid-pack drivers. It's Jack Hodson who has a collision with Andrew Brammer, or it could have been the other way around, to be fair. Either way, Andrew Brammer loses out. Jack Hodson up into P6. Disaster for our midfield drivers here. Hello to 939 Corsa there, Greg Young in the YouTube comments who does note, yes, exposure contrast a bit too high. Quite rightly, sir. It's a CSP bug. I've been looking at this for a couple of seasons now, quite frankly. I have adjusted the settings. I've got the exposure actually set very low indeed. I suspect there's an XML file somewhere that is overriding something and is adjusting the exposure on the circuit. There are some camera angles where it looks okay, but then I don't know if there's a filter that's compensating and trying to basically blow out the exposure because it thinks it's too dark. Either way, it does cause this blown out effect. Thank you for noting it. It is something that I'm aware of. I will eventually, when I get enough time to pour into it, will try to get that resolved. Either way, 6 minutes to go in this race now. Got a bit of a gap starting to build up between a few drivers now. Matt Daly seems to have the control over Andrew Whitehead. We settle into a bit of a rhythm now. It's taken a while because we've had some great action so far in this race. Paul Milman, unfortunately, retiring from the session as well. Nathan Birch will stay in the session, so we should see him in the reverse grid race. We should also, hopefully at least, see Paul Milman as well. Not sure if those two will take... Well, no, Paul won't take points away from this race, but not quite sure if Nathan will either because he will have quite a few laps to make up in this race. But the reverse grid race is, of course, coming up next as we see Andrew Brammer getting back past Jack Hodson. And that is just on merit. That is just on track that Andrew Brammer gets back past the driver in the grey liveried car there. But just over 5 minutes to go in this race. Let's have a look at how the championship is shaping up. And I nearly gave you the information on the 2024 championship, but I can tell you that in the 2025 running, it is going to be Matt Daly with a sizable lead. Round 8 with 368 points to his name, 105 points, 95 points ahead of David Chelly. That is David Chelly with 273 points to his name. That is a pretty insurmountable gap at this point. Of course, with 4 rounds left after this one, we will have, well, excluding race 1 that we're currently taking part in, we will have 9 races left where drivers can score points. So mathematically, it's definitely possible for David Chelly to overtake Matt Daly. The question is if that will be the case, because Matt Daly cares about his touring car championship, I suspect. So he's going to try and push on to maintain that lead. Alan Matthews running in P3 at the moment, 134 points. But Andrew Whitehead certainly closing up that gap at the moment, 122 points to his name, ahead of Andy Craker, Will Inglis, Andrew Rammer, Jack Hodson, Paul Millman, Steve Knight, Nathan Birch, as well as Greg Young, Rosie Oliver, and Guy Swarbrick in this running. So a good few points to pick up for Guy Swarbrick. It's been a few rounds that he's missed, so great to see Guy back in the action here for the AROC Racing Leagues. He's been a very busy man as of late, so great to see him making the time to jump on board for some touring car action. Steve Knight as well. Good points to be scored here ahead of Paul Milne. In fact, he won't jump ahead of Paul Milne, but we'll be closing up that gap as well. And Andrew Whitehead looking like he's going to be closing up that gap to Alan Matthews. In fact, I think the second race of this evening will be pretty important in terms of championship standings as we head into the final few minutes of this race. Now, our reverse grid race, a reminder, is just a reversal of what we see in the results for race 1. So if you come home with a P1 or a P2, P3, P4, you're going to be in the bottom 4 for the reverse grid race. Now, there is a cut-off there for if you're many laps behind or if you join quite late in the race, you're going to be at the back of the order anyway. But it just provides that extra bit of action for us here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. But we've seen some great battles so far this evening between the likes of Matt Daly and Andrew Whitehead, Jack Hodson, Andrew Rammer as well. And what an almighty drive from David Chelly so far this evening as he pushes on with a 2-minute 9.8, his last lap. So he's still got some great pace in him. In fact, that will be top-tier qualifying pace even this late on into the stint. Here we go then, final few seconds of this race, and I must apologise, by the way, for the gaps. If you do notice the gaps in the commentary, still trying to sort these technical issues with the engine sound, but also I do have a very long day of commentary over the weekend in the world of real racing. I'll say real racing, some karting, nothing like the world of AROC Racing League's action and some proper Alfa Romeos heading around the circuit, but I digress. And unfortunately, I've got to keep my voice clean for that. And I've been a bit under weather over the past couple of months. It feels like I'm getting towards the end of it now, but still a bit kind of sensitive to strenuous activity. At least that's my excuse for not going to the gym. Anyway, penultimate lap now for David Chelly here. Leads by 18 seconds, has just been building this lead, has had no real challenge apart from on lap 1 in the first couple of corners from Andrew Whitehead. Great drive for David Chelly here so far. He doesn't lead the championship, but this is a true champion's drive, it must be said. With 20 seconds, he leads this race on the penultimate lap. Greg Young still pushing on. Personal best through Sector 1, actually. He's closing up to Andrew Whitehead here, as you can see. Andrew, of course, pushing on very aggressively early on in this race to try and bring a challenge to Matt Daly. The pace has dropped off, though. Matt Daly breaks away by about 12 seconds now. Greg Young closing up, 0.7 of a second separating them now as David Chelly, our lead driver, starts the final lap of this race. So we're going to stay on board with Andrew Whitehead here. We're going to jump to David Chelly at some point, of course, to celebrate his race lead and potential race victory. But Andrew Whitehead here potentially feeling that pressure now as we have a battle of the two red Juliettas. Apologies, I was just checking that one out for myself there, folks, because for a brief moment I saw Matt Daly overtaking David Chelly and thought something might have gone awry at the front end of the field. Nothing has, bit of a timing glitch, but we look back down to P3 here because that gap between Andrew Whitehead and Greg Young has closed up just that little bit more now, and now it is a proper battle for the final spot on the podium. And if you've enjoyed this action so far, folks, I've got great news. There's another 25 minutes and then some coming up in just a few moments as we get ready for the reverse grid race. Race 2 of this evening is still yet to come as Andrew Whitehead goes fully on the defensive here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. Now we are heading through to the latter part of the lap. There we see Andrew Whitehead having a look around the outside, but we're going to go on board with David Chelly as he rounds the final corner back onto the start-finish straight and revels in victory. And what a victory it has been for David Chelly, leading by a comfortable margin as well. He crosses the line to take race victory. Meanwhile, further down the order, Greg Young gets ahead of Andrew Whitehead. I was fearful at the time it was going to line up like that, and it did. As we looked at David Chelly crossing the line, there we see Greg Young jumping into P3. What can Andrew Whitehead do from the outside? He goes late on the brakes around the outside, tries to hang it round. Who gets the better run? Matt Daly comes home P2, but Andrew Whitehead, I'd say, gets that better run out of that final corner. A great save from the white and red liveried car. They're side by side still. Who's going to call it? Greg Young gets those out in front. It's Greg Young who just takes P3 in this race, but by 0.05 of a second. Brilliant stuff from our two drivers there. Greg Young gets the nose out in front, and as we head into that final corner, takes P3. Andrew Whitehead says, don't you worry, I'm not quite done yet. Hangs it around the outside, gets a better run, but with a potentially a bit of a better gearing or different aerodynamic setup, it's going to be Greg Young who swoops back past to take P3 in the end. What a finish between our two drivers for P3 there in the end. I've pretty much lost my voice at this point. There's been so much action here. Great driving between those two there to come home with P3. Well, that was plenty exciting, wasn't it, now, as we see our drivers coming home? Matt Daly comes home P2, of course. Alan Matthews with a P5 there as well. And we're going to get ready for the reverse grid race coming up in just a few minutes. So don't go anywhere, folks. We've got plenty more action to come. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. The action continues on as we jump into the commentary car 75, actually. So I need to amend that. There we go. Anyway, just over 15 seconds down to light out. It's Jack Hudson, Andrew Brammer, front row, Alan Matthews, Andrew Whitehead, Greg Young, Matt Daly, David Shelley, Guy Swarbrick, Steve Knight, Paul Millman, and Nathan Birch. Our 11-car grid for the action here at Jeddah this evening. The lights begin to light up now, as we do indeed have 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away for race 2 here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. A good start there for Alan Matthews, Andrew Whitehead, and Greg Young, actually, as we see them all trying to work their way through. Bit of wheel spin for Andrew Brammer, but he does still lead this race. This is going to be a great opportunity, I suspect, for Andrew Brammer in this race, as he does certainly know how to navigate his way around this circuit. I mean, we saw it just one race ago. We're going to jump aboard, though, with Greg Young. He tries to push on to try and find a way past Andrew Whitehead. Watch out, though, for Alan Matthews and David Shelley. David Shelley, really watch out for that driver there as we head through towards the end of Sector 1 in just a moment. Guy Swarbrick starting in P7. Matt Daly not having the start that he would have wanted, I suspect. Stuck behind Guy Swarbrick at the moment. Gets ahead of Steve Knight, Jack Hudson, and Paul Millman. But a little bit further back to his nearest rivals. Meanwhile, we can see Jack Hodson getting past Steve Knight there. Looks like a great getaway and a good start to the action for Jack Hodson. As we see Guy Swarbrick also sizing up a move there on Matt Daly. Nothing he could do, so thinks better of it, which is a wise choice, I suspect, as we push on. Interesting to see that all of the drivers running on the soft compound tyre now, apart from Steve Knight. Steve Knight staying on that medium, but everyone else deciding that the soft has plenty of life to give here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. Andrew Brammer then leading this race. In fact, just about losing that lead to Andrew Whitehead as we run down towards Sector 3. It's Andrew Brammer who takes a brave and bold move into the inside of the left-hander there. That goes a little bit wrong for him, and it costs him quite a few positions in the end. Greg Young now leads this race ahead of Andrew Whitehead, who's got all the pressure mounting against him. It's Alan Matthews, rather, and David Chelly. It's going to be Alan on the inside, David Chelly trying to run it around the outside. As you can see, it's pretty much Andrew Whitehead being passed around between Alan and David Chelly there. Alan Matthews runs in P2 then. Gets a nose out in front. David Chelly follows in quick succession. David Chelly, a pretty elbows-out driver, has got that passion, got that flair for racing, and certainly has the one-lap pace as well. As we go 3 wide into the first corner here, down the start-finish straight, it's going to be David Chelly who wins out, echoing Andrew Whitehead's move in the first race, or the end of the first race against Matt Daly, no less. We saw David Chelly replicating that to hang it around the outside and jump into second position. Now Matt Daly runs in P6. He gets ahead of Nathan Birch as he climbs his way up through the order. Meanwhile, out in front, Greg Young leads by 1.2 seconds. The question is, for how long? Usually you'd be seeing at this point David Chelly taking the purple sectors, but we look further down the order and we see that it's Andrew Brammer running in P5 with a Sector 1 purple, and then it's Matt Daly running Sector 2 and Sector 3 purple as well. So these two in the midst of battle, trading purple sectors. They've brought Nathan Birch into the action as well. Nathan had some great pace, was battling with his teammate. He didn't quite have the ability to show it later on into race 1 with those unfortunate incidents, but he's back here for some race 2 action, which is what we like to see as Andrew Whitehead, not Andrew Whitehead, rather, Andrew Brammer, too many Andrews, tries to hang it round the outside, thinks better of it, and continues on in P7. Meanwhile, at the front end of the field, I suspected this may be the case, but now we're going to see that Greg Young is feeling the pressure from David Chelly. Less than a tenth separating these two drivers as David Chelly hangs it around the outside. Greg Young hugs the inside, but loses out on a bit of momentum. Too deep into the corner, though, for David Chelly. And if we had FIA stewards here this evening, would you be saying, you got to give that corner back, David? I think you just might be. I'm a commentator, not a steward. I can't make decisions and can't make choices on what should happen in the race. But what I can say is you'd be looking at giving that back. Either way, Greg Young took the lead of this race, opts for the outside line, and completely on merit this time around, David Chelly takes back the lead of this race. 2/10 now, the gap between David and Greg. Very minimal indeed. And there we see Andrew Whitehead back onto the start-finish straight. 9/10 of a second. Our top 3 covered by less than a second, folks. This is great stuff from our leading pack. David Chelly dives down the inside there. Nearly goes too deep into turn 2, in fact, but continues on. 2/10 is now the margin between these two leading drivers as we see Greg Young really bringing a challenge now. Has a look briefly at the outside there, thinks better of it because there's a bit of a switchback coming up for the next corner, and follows through in single file. Running in P2 is Greg Young. Andrew Whitehead just a little bit further back. I have great news, folks. Apologies, it's taken just a little bit over 1 race and a qualifying session as well, but we do at least have some game audio returning to us. Jack Hodson getting ahead of Guy Swarbrick there. In fact, not quite getting ahead just yet. Side by side, and Guy Swarbrick holds that inside line there. Very nicely held from Guy Swarbrick, heading around the sweeping left hand at the bottom end of the circuit. eventually does lose out of the position. No, Jack Hodson pushing his tyres to the max, keeping the momentum around the outside of the corner, and is in to P7. Guy Swarbrick, meanwhile, in P8. Will he have a challenge? Let's quite see, but it's going to be another couple of important points here for Guy Swarbrick in this race. Steve Knight running in P10 on the mediums. Nathan Birch retiring from the session. Didn't quite catch that, but unfortunate end to this evening's racing. What a shame for Nathan Birch. It's been a little while since Nathan's taken part in a few seasons as well. He's made that return. We knew he had great pace from what we saw a couple of years back. Just hasn't quite been able to make it stick here in the touring car action. Now, I know it's been not the best season in terms of the touring car racing to bring the streams to you. We've missed quite a few rounds, but in what we've seen so far this year at least, unfortunately Nathan just hasn't been able to put the weekend together. We know he has the pace. Let's hope that towards the end of the season and looking further into the second half of 2025, he has a bit more to look forward to. And speaking of looking forward, it's Alan Matthews who was looking forward to taking a P4 away from Matt Daly. Was a bit too far back to make it stick, so had to think better of it, and actually took a pretty bold line. I'm going to use the word bold to describe his line through turn 1 there. Took a bold line through turn 1, did Alan Matthews. Either way, we continue on as the action settles ever so slightly now as we get into the rhythm here in race 2, our reverse grid race. Here we see Alan Matthews versus Greg Young. Down the inside goes Alan Matthews and gets ahead of Greg Young. This isn't that for the lead as the timing tower would have you believe. It's a little bit further back than that, but still an all-important position gain for Alan Matthews there. Greg Young having some immense pace early on in this race, but not quite at those heights just yet. Although I say that as we head into the mid-phase of this race. His previous lap, still his fastest lap so far in this action. Back onto the start, finish straight then. Matt Daly running in P3, Alan Matthews P4. Question is for how long though, because here is Greg Young, 15 minutes to go in this race, so still plenty of action to go. Alan Matthews really, I mean, he's found a line that works. And there are no stewards in the AROC racing leagues, because we're all fair, we're all kind, and we all know each other very well. We're all very friendly. So, because we're so friendly, if you feel like joining, do please get involved. You don't have to be an Alfa Romeo Owners Club member in order to join, etc, etc. Drop a comment into this video, ping me a message. I'm Reeve509 on Instagram, RT Media UK as well. Find me on any social media platforms that you can think of and get involved if you would like to. We're all very kind, we're all very fair, but through turn 1, I do think Alan Matthews has found a way to gain potentially a little bit of time. Don't worry, don't think he's cheating or doing anything wrong, because I can promise you that in the Discord chat at the moment, the paddock chat, they are at least verbally reprimanding him for that interpretation of the circuit, shall we say. Either way, it's provided some great action because Greg Young is still pushing on to try and find a way past. And I should also mention, coming up in around about, in fact, not around about, exactly 4 days on the dot, if you've been a little bit thirsty for some Alfa Romeo Owners Club action, you've not been quite quenched by the Alfa Romeo Owners Racing Leagues action, fear not. we have the Spring Alpha Day coming up in just 4 days. It'll be held at Arley Hall in Cheshire, so actually, just like Alton Park, a local venue to myself. I'll be there representing the Mito Register and turning up in my ever so enjoyable Mito. But if you're an AROC Racing Leagues member, or if you're just an avid viewer, or even an outside member of the AROC Racing Leagues, or just a fan of the Owners Club, or anything like that, it's only a few quid to get a ticket, get involved, and come up to Cheshire for some great racing action. And we've just seen some there as Greg Young finds a way past Alan Matthews there, gets a nose down into the first corner, jumps on the brakes, and there we go. It is P4 for Greg Young, takes the position back. The question is for how long, and I should also add, in all of this battling, we can see Andrew Brammer closing up the gap and closing up to these two battling out for P4. Meanwhile, Guy Schwarber gets ahead of Paul Millman. We didn't see a battle between these two all that much in race 1 because Paul had an unfortunate retirement. I suspect that we're going to see a bit more here in race 2. There we can see Guy Swarbrick under pressure from Paul Millman. Paul bringing quite a nice challenge to Guy at the moment. 2 minutes 16 on the last lap. Guy Swarbrick 2 minutes 17 to a second advantage to Paul. And the best lap, Paul, is a couple of seconds quicker than Guy as well. So as we head into the second half of this race, we're going to see some great stuff from these two drivers. There we can see Paul having a look around the outside there. That gives him the inside for the right-hander coming up. Dives onto the brakes, does Guy Swarbrick. Puff of smoke from the lockup. And we push on further into the lap. Less than 12 minutes to go in this race now. And Paul Millman, he certainly has the pace to close up, but has not yet been able to find the pace to overtake as we go side by side around the outside. This certainly works for a couple of drivers who have attempted it in the past as we head into that final corner. That outside line is a surprising good method of trying to find a way past. But it works for Paul Millman as well as we head on to the start-finish straight there. Andrew Brammer retiring from the session, unfortunately. Guy Swarbrick dropping back behind Paul Millman now. Less than 10 minutes to go in this race. Now here is our order as things stand. David Shelley once again leads this race by a comfortable margin. Let's not forget he came home with over 15 seconds of an advantage in race 1. Andrew Whitehead now running it in P2, but the question is for how long, because down the inside there goes Matt Daly. Matt Daly is still going to be side by side with Andrew Whitehead as we head back onto the start-finish straight, but Andrew Whitehead there with a better run through that final corner, get a nose out in front, but it's going to be Matt Daly with the inside line here into that first corner. This is going to be a crucial braking zone for Andrew Whitehead, and he has to relent to Matt Daly there. Brilliant stuff from these two. Nice, clean racing, very respectful, brilliant action there from the two contrasting cars as we are still side by side as we head further into the first sector. It's Matt Daly who leads ahead of Andrew Whitehead. Not too far back at all is Greg Young. Greg Young briefly looked like he might have had a challenge from Alan Matthews, but I think that was a bit of an optical illusion as we jump back on board with Andrew Whitehead. What a move there from Matt Daly. Set it up through that final corner and just waited for it to be completely executed into the first. But let's have a look at the championship standings after the first race. So perhaps it's no surprise that Matt Daly still leads by a very comfortable margin, but that gap has been closed ever so slightly by David Chelly, and if things stay this way, they'll close just that little bit more. David Chelly, 308 points to Matt Daly's 386, Alan Matthews 144, and then Andrew Whitehead 134. I think in all of our touring car running, in fact any of our championship running, I don't think we've ever seen a margin quite so substantial between P3 and P2 that is more than double the points David Chelly has scored over Alan Matthews. Our midfield drivers taking points away from each other and not progressing through the championship like we usually see in the season. That consistency isn't quite there in this season by the looks of things compared to the previous running, and that just means that David Chelly and Matt Daly have just romped away in terms of points. I don't think we're going to see any midfield drivers being an outside challenge this late into the season. It's going to be an out-and-out fight between Matt Daly and David Chelly, but Andrew Whitehead 10 points behind Alan Matthews, so that gap is going to close up just that little bit more, and it could close up more if Whitehead is able to find a way past Matt Daly. Let's not forget, just one race ago, the fortunes were very much turned around here. It was Matt Daly who found his way past Andrew Whitehead rather, and Andrew Whitehead was left scratching his head a bit. This time around, it's going to be Andrew Whitehead who is putting that pressure on Matt Daly, goes down the inside, gets a nose out in front, late onto the brakes, but will it be enough? I don't think it will, because there, once again, is Matt Daly taking the inside line. Nice move. Couple of tenths separate the two drivers. Matt Daly running in P2, Andrew Whitehead in P3. He kept the momentum running through that second corner. That is crucial as he tries to continue that pressure being applied to Matt Daly. Just over 6 minutes to go in this race now, and it is looking mighty close between our two podium contenders here. Andrew Whitehead still putting that pressure on, having a look around the outside as we head into that final corner. This outside run into that final corner has often proven the missing piece in a driver's challenge to try and find a way past a defending driver. Andrew Whitehead not trying to get past Matt Daly here for the time being, but is in fact, no, gets a great run, goes side by side. This is a proper turnaround in fortunes for Andrew Whitehead here. This has been a great battle over the weekend for these two drivers. It's now Andrew Whitehead with the inside, but Matt Daly tries to hang it round the outside. He has to relent the position into the second corner once again, something Max Verstappen seemingly quite incapable of. Matt Daly does it. I joke, of course. Quite a Max Verstappen fan, actually, but you must admit that run into the first corner, Matt Daly showing how it is done there, as Andrew Whitehead now gets ahead of Matt Daly. The question is, for how long? Here we see Matt Daly having a look down the inside there, and in fact holding it on that inside line. The textbook move from Matt Daly into the left hand at the bottom of the circuit. Gets a nose out back in front, but now has to defend all the way back down to the bottom of the circuit as we run towards the final sector of the lap. Less than 1 minute to go on the clock, and these two battling has really slowed them down in comparison to David Chelly. David Chelly hasn't quite met the heights of his pace that he achieved in race 1. Still running at 2:10, so mighty impressive, but these two battling has slowed themselves down. This is great stuff, though, from Andrew Whitehead and Matt Daly. Matt Daly running in P2, smoke from both as they try to head into the end of Sector 1, well, rather the mid-phase of Sector 1. Around about turn 6, turn 7, as we see Matt Daly around about 6 tenths of a second ahead now, but Matt Daly having the measure of Andrew Whitehead, at least for the time being, as we are now on the penultimate lap of this race. Having a look around the outside, it's Andrew Whitehead as we head through the final corner once more, proving to be advantageous over quite a few moments in this race weekend as we start the final lap of this race with David Chelly. Now, these two also jumping onto the final lap. Andrew Whitehead with a bit of a slipstream advantage here. These touring cars, not massive in terms of their slipstream advantage, but still it does make a difference around the outside. Tries to go Andrew Whitehead. Matt Daly on the inside, but goes too deep into turn 2. And it's a rollover for Andrew Whitehead. Disaster in this race. It's been a while since we've seen a true rollover like that. But Andrew Whitehead, luckily, rolls back onto all 4 wheels, is able to carry on. And look at that, folks. You know what? Back of my mind, I had a feeling that was going to happen. Matt Daly decides I put the nose in where perhaps I shouldn't have, and showing true gentlemanly racecraft, backs off, lets Andrew Whitehead back past, but most importantly, doesn't give up. He says to his rival, come on, that should have been your corner, you're in the lead, and now we're going to get a lap of racing action between these two. Fantastic work from these two then, as we see Andrew Whitehead defending the inside, Matt Daly having a look around the outside, and all they're battling and rolling over, of course. There we see Greg Young in the midst there, just in the background. And there you have it, folks, an advert for Alfa Romeo Giulietta reliability and craftsmanship, if ever there was some. Andrew Whitehead's rolled his over, and look, he's carrying on, and he's carrying on in a good pace as well. Good form there from Andrew Whitehead. Still in P2, Matt Daly trying to find a way past. Meanwhile, David Chelly leads this race by a very comfortable indeed 24 seconds as we push on towards the final part of the lap with our race leader. Side by side, though, with Matt Daly and Andrew Whitehead. They make big contact there. Matt Daly gets a nose down the inside. Andrew Whitehead tries to close up the gap. I don't think we're going to see the same thing once more as Andrew Whitehead drops down to P3, and instead of battling for P2, very much now has to focus on just trying to keep the podium scoring position in this race, because there is Greg Young hanging it around the outside. This is brilliant stuff. David Chelly takes our race to victory. Congratulations, David. A remarkable drive all weekend, pretty much unchallenged, but certainly challenged is Matt Daly. Certainly challenged is Andrew Whitehead. There's contact between the two drivers who are battling for P2 for so long in this race. We're going to be pretty much free wide. Matt Daly goes off, is down into P4. All of a sudden, it's going to be Andrew Whitehead with nose out in front, leading by mere hundredths. It's Andrew Whitehead ahead of Greg Young, ahead of Matt Daly. Who could have predicted that final part of the race? What a blistering end to the action here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. It's Andrew Whitehead and Greg Young ahead of Matt Daly. Alan Matthews quietly brings home a nice P5. It's going to be Jack Hodson in P6 with also a brilliant drive. We haven't seen too much from Jack here in in race 2. He comes home to take home P6. It's going to wait for Paul Millman then, who comes home P7, Andrew Brammer P8, Guy Swarbrick P9, and Steve Knight P10. But my oh my, what a finish for our fight for the podium here, ladies and gentlemen. That is what the AROC Racing Leagues can deliver in terms of some great racing action. My voice, I tried to protect it for this weekend, but I'm going to tell you now, it's pretty much gone. So if you want to listen to me squeaking, I'll be on YouTube somewhere over the weekend. But that is great stuff from our competitors here in the AROC Racing Leagues. Paul Millman brings the car home ahead of Andrew Brammer, who comes home P8, Guy Swarbrick P9, and then we have a small wait to Steve Knight, who rounds out our 10-car grid for this evening's racing. I hope you've enjoyed watching this evening as much as I've enjoyed commentating. I'll see you in a very short while. I won't be here to commentate for the next round. Apologies there. Prior commitments mean that I can't make it to the Formula Alpha running here at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. We'll be back in a fortnight's time for some more streaming action. So I hope you've enjoyed watching. Thank you very much for watching, and a good evening.